at the Metzzila Diabetes Center. These animals ate ravenously. They ate a lot while remaining slim, and it wasn't the fake slimness. They didn't get diabetes. They didn't get heart disease. They lived 20% longer. They got the benefits of eating less while eating more, and there's several pharmaceutical companies rushing to bring that to the human market. That's just one of the 23,000 genes we'd like to consider changing to be consistent with our modern world today and extend human longevity. There are genes that we could turn off that promote heart disease and cancer and aging processes. There's genes we'd like to add that would protect us from those things. And we have new technologies now that can change our genes, not just in a newborn, but in a mature individual. RNA interference, which just got the Nobel Prize, can turn genes off. New forms of gene therapy can add new genes. And I'll talk tomorrow a little bit before our dialogue how these technologies work. We can design them on computers. We can test them out on biological simulators that can simulate and predict what things will do inside the human body, and these are gearing up exponentially. Now, all of these things I've mentioned are in an early stage, but people confuse an early stage with meaning that these things are going to take centuries and ignore the tremendous power of exponential growth. These technologies, now that they're an information technology, are going to be 1,000 times more powerful in 10 years, 1,000,000 times more powerful in 20 years, and it will be a very different era. In my health books, we talk about 3 bridges to dramatically extending human longevity. Bridge 1 is what you can do right now, and there's actually more that you can do than people realize to slow down aging disease processes. The goal of that is really to bring us to the second stage, which is the full maturation of the biotechnology revolution, with many of the leaders here in Israel and many of the pioneering work coming out of Israeli research facilities and universities, where we can really reprogram the software of life. And that'll bring us to the third bridge, which is the nanotechnology revolution, where we can go beyond the limitations of biology. If I were to say someday you'll have millions and eventually billions of nanobots, blood cell-sized robots in your bloodstream going through your body, augmenting your immune system, keeping you healthy from inside, you might think, well, okay, that sounds very futuristic. I point out there's actually about 50 experiments already in animals of doing that with the first generation of blood cell-sized devices that are nano-engineered. One scientist cured type 1 diabetes in rats with a blood cell-sized device, lets insulin out in a controlled fashion, blocks antibodies, has 7 nanometer pores, which are very tiny pores to let the insulin out. And this has actually worked and is now, they're gearing up for human trials. At MIT, they have a device that can detect cancer cells in the bloodstream. These are blood cell-sized devices, latch onto them and destroy them. So these are early experiments also, but these technologies will be 1,000,000 times more powerful in 20 years. And we will be adding them to our body and brain. There are already today artificial pancreases. There's not an organ you can mention where there aren't augmentations or replacements being developed to go beyond the limitations of biology. And sometimes people say, well, if we're going to put all these technologies in our body, they're going to go inside our brain, interact with our biological neurons, put our brains on the internet, are we going to lose our humanity? Well, it really depends on how you define being human. I define being human as the species that goes beyond our limitations. Ever since we picked up a stick to reach a higher branch, we've been using our tools to go beyond our limitations, to make ourselves more than we are. And then we created technology, and that has accelerated and grown exponentially, first to expand our physical reach. Now it expands our mental reach. I can access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes that make me smarter than I would be otherwise. And these are getting closer to us. When Mr. Netanyahu and I were students at MIT, we had to go take our bicycles across campus to get to the computer. Now it's in our pockets. It eventually will be inside our bodies and brains. And people wonder, well, this is only going to be the province of the rich. The wealthy will have these tools to make ourselves greater, and the poor won't have them. And I say, yeah, like cell phones today. Half the world, actually 2/3 of the world, 4 billion people have cell phones, and they're not just phones. They are very powerful communicators and knowledge access devices that allow us to access all of human knowledge. It took us 10 years to put out the first billion cell phones, 3 years to put out the second billion, 14 months to put out the third billion, 8 months to put out the fourth billion. Within 2 years, there'll be 6 billion cell phones. And they don't just make phone calls. They do, well, according to Apple, 65,000 different things. And they really expand who we are. So these technologies make ourselves greater. They do, as President Perez pointed out 15 years ago, transcend limitations. They transcend boundaries. They allow us to create communities that expand beyond our reach. I think it's a very democratizing technology. In my first book in the 1980s, which I wrote in the early 80s, I talked about how the Soviet Union would be swept away by this decentralized electronic communication that was emerging, which was much more powerful than the copiers they had been banning. And indeed, in that 1991 coup against Gorbachev, the photo opportunity was Yeltsin standing on a tank. But what really overturned that coup was the clandestine network of teletype machines connecting emails and fax machines that kept everybody in the know. And then we saw a great wave of democracies during the 1990s with the rise of the World Wide Web, and we can see the impact of social networks today. And it's democratizing in terms of our creativity. A kid in her dorm room today can create a full-length high-definition motion picture with her $300 high-definition camera and our personal computer. You used to have to be a Hollywood studio to do that. A couple of kids at Stanford wrote some software on their $1,000 laptops, revolutionized web search, and created a company worth $150 billion today. So the tools of creative change are in everybody's hands. I got back from China recently, and half the people in China have these devices, and they're communicating with each other, and they're creating knowledge. It's true of people all around the world. So I think it's a very exciting time to be alive. Technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used to expand our creativity or be destructive. So everybody needs to get engaged to keep these technologies safe, to create defensive systems against people who would abuse it. But I think the potential for tomorrow is very optimistic indeed. Thank you very much.